Welcome back to our channel. In the quiet, clinking rhythm of daily life, the US dime often plays a subtle role. It's small, it's light, and it rarely commands attention. Yet every now and then, a single dime breaks free from anonymity and becomes something extraordinary. Such is the case with the very rare 1972 US 1 dime coin. At first glance, it looks like any other, Roosevelt's familiar profile on the front, the classic torch, oak branch, and olive branch design on the back. But hidden within this particular year lies a coin that defied the expectations of even the most seasoned collectors. A coin that emerged not through celebration or ceremony, but through a quiet and accidental deviation that turned a 10-cent piece into a legend. The early 1970s were a stable time for US coin production. The design of the dime hadn't changed in decades, and the transition to clad coinage, using copper and nickel instead of silver, was already complete. By 1972, all Roosevelt dimes were being minted with a copper core and nickel coating, a change implemented after 1964 to curb rising silver costs. These new coins looked nearly identical to their silver predecessors, but carried far less intrinsic value. It was business as usual at the mint, with millions of dimes rolling out from Philadelphia and Denver. But somewhere in that sea of predictable production, something remarkable happened. An error was made. Not the kind of error that is caught and corrected. This was one that slipped through the cracks, undetected, only to be discovered later by sharp-eyed collectors who knew exactly what to look for. Among the mass of 1972 dimes, a few unique specimens emerged that bore strange characteristics, subtle yet significant details that marked them as profoundly rare. These weren't gimmicks. They were genuine minting mistakes, and they would come to be worth far more than anyone could have imagined. Some of the most valuable 1972 dimes were struck on the wrong planchet. Instead of being minted on the standard copper-nickel dime blank, a few were mistakenly struck on planchets intended for cents or even foreign coins. The result was a Roosevelt dime that was too light, oddly colored, or not quite the right size. Others showed signs of being struck on leftover silver planchets, something that, by 1972, should have been impossible. Yet somehow, through a twist of fate and human oversight, these anomalies were created and entered circulation. Then there were the dramatic striking errors. Dimes from 1972 have surfaced with off-center strikes, double dies, or even broad strikes where the coin spilled over the collar and lost its reeded edge. Each of these variations is rare in its own right, but when they occur in a specific year, especially one like 1972, they attract serious attention. The kind of attention that turns a 10-cent coin into the centerpiece of an elite collection. Collectors began to take notice as these rare dimes started appearing at coin shows and auctions. The differences weren't always obvious to the untrained eye, but for those who knew what to look for, they were clear as day. A slightly redder hue, a thinner rim, an off-center image, these small markers told a much larger story. And that story was one of rarity, chance, and hidden value. One such story involves a man in Ohio who was sifting through an inherited coin jar. Amidst the usual nickels and pennies, he spotted a 1972 dime that looked unusually golden in color. Curious, he took it to a local dealer, who confirmed it had been struck on a brass planchet, likely intended for a foreign coin. That tiny mistake turned what could have been a routine coin into a piece worth tens of thousands. It had sat in a jar for decades, passed over by countless hands, waiting for someone to recognize it for what it truly was. The mystique of the 1972 rare dime lies in its unpredictability. Unlike commemorative issues or collector sets, these coins weren't created with fanfare. They were born of error, of unnoticed deviation. And that makes them even more compelling. They serve as a reminder that perfection isn't always the most valuable trait. Sometimes, it's the flaw, the momentary lapse, that gives something lasting worth. As more examples surfaced, grading services began taking a closer look. These coins, when verified and encapsulated, began fetching astonishing figures at auction. Collectors who specialized in error coins were eager to add them to their portfolios, knowing that the 1972 rare dime was not only elusive, but historically significant. It represented a moment when the machinery of minting faltered just long enough to create something unforgettable, what makes this story even more intriguing is how many people may still be unaware that they possess such a coin. These dimes could be resting in forgotten coffee cans, wedged into the cracks of old furniture, or tucked into coin rolls awaiting deposit. Every time a 1972 dime surfaces, it brings with it the possibility that another may still be out there, undiscovered, unrecognized, waiting, and while the search continues, so does the rise in value. As demand has grown, so too has the worth of these rare dimes. They are more than just currency, they are artifacts, bearing witness to a singular moment in American minting history. To hold one is to hold a secret that the mint never meant to share, a secret that now commands attention and respect across the coin-collecting world. For those lucky enough to discover one, the financial rewards can be stunning. Depending on the nature of the error, the clarity of the strike, and the overall condition of the coin, a rare 1972 US 1 dime can command anywhere from $55,000 to as much as $140,000 on the market. That's the kind of value that transforms a pocket-sized piece of metal into a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. So the next time you're handed change at the grocery store, don't be too quick to dismiss it. Look at the dimes. Hold them to the light. Feel their weight. Examine their edges. Because you never know when one of them might be something extraordinary. One coin among billions. A dime that wasn't supposed to happen. A mistake that became a masterpiece. A treasure, hiding in plain sight. In 1989, the U.S. Mint was a well-oiled machine, producing coins with industrial precision. The Roosevelt dime, unchanged in basic design since 1946, was quietly circulating as it had for decades, bearing the proud profile of President Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse and the familiar torch, oak branch, and olive branch on the reverse. Most Americans never paused to examine it. The 10-cent coin served its purpose in vending machines, laundromats, and coffee shop tip jars. Yet among the hundreds of millions struck that year, something subtle, something unintended, slipped through the cracks, a hidden anomaly overlooked by the naked eye, but unmistakable to the trained observer. The Denver and Philadelphia Mint struck over 2.6 billion dimes in 1989. That sheer volume made the odds of finding anything unusual seem astronomically low. However, even in the most tightly controlled environments, moments of mechanical imperfection can ripple forward, quietly embedding themselves into history. It wasn't until years later that whispers of a peculiar 1989 dime began circulating through numismatic circles, first as rumor, then as discovery. For collector Marcus Lyle, it started with nothing more than a jar of loose change in his grandfather's attic in rural Pennsylvania. Marcus, a lifelong enthusiast of coin roll hunting, had never taken the time to sift through the family's old jars. One rainy afternoon in 2018, curiosity got the better of him. He didn't expect much. Most coins were worn, tarnished, common. But one 1989 dime caught his attention. The lettering along the rim, particularly the words, United States of America, looked slightly bloated, as though they'd been struck with an uneven hand. He flipped the coin. The reverse revealed a slightly off-center torch, nudged just a fraction of a millimeter downward. More intriguing was the faint doubling on the motto, E pluribus unum, especially on the letters, R and B. At first, he suspected post-mint damage. Maybe a worn die or contact mark. But something felt off. The coin didn't look like the typical circulation casualty. The edges were clean. The devices, raised parts of the coin, were unusually sharp. The surface shimmered with a brightness not often seen in average dimes. After hours comparing it with known varieties and error types, Marcus submitted the coin to NGC for a professional evaluation. Weeks passed. Then the confirmation arrived: 1989 dime, double die reverse, partial collar strike, MS64. It was a combination of flaws, an extremely rare double die paired with a misaligned collar during the strike. The result was a coin both technically unusual and visually subtle, a specimen that might have passed by countless eyes unnoticed. Once word spread of this find, other collectors began inspecting their own stashes of 1989 dimes. Reports trickled in. A woman in Ohio unearthed a dime where Roosevelt's profile appeared almost etched with extra depth, as if outlined twice, the eye and nose slightly shadowed by a secondary image. Another collector in Texas found a coin struck slightly off-center with doubling on Liberty, and a broad strike that left the coin's rim flatter and wider than standard. Still, these were needle-in-a-haystack discoveries. For every 1,000 rolls searched, maybe one coin hinted at something special. And fewer still stood up to the scrutiny of expert grading. What made the 1989 dime anomalies truly captivating was how varied they were. Some coins featured clean, symmetrical doubling on the reverse, particularly in the olive leaves or the vertical torch flame. Others displayed planchet errors, where the coin's metal blank was either underweight or had uneven edges. The rarest examples combined multiple issues: double die reverses with rotation errors, or obverse bearing weak strikes due to improper die spacing. No two were exactly alike, creating a mosaic of errors under a single year and denomination. The deeper the community dug, the more the puzzle grew. A major dealer in California documented a specimen with an unusual luster, minted on a foreign planchet intended for another denomination. It was lighter than a standard dime and rang differently when dropped on a hard surface. X-ray fluorescence testing confirmed it had a copper-zinc composition, not the expected copper-nickel clad. Whether it was a mix-up with foreign coin blanks or a rare transitional piece remained uncertain. That dime later sold in a private sale for a reported $54,000. As awareness increased, grading services began cataloging these 1989 errors as distinct varieties. Still, total verified examples remained extremely low, fewer than 24 confirmed by 2025. Many are likely still hiding in penny jars, dresser drawers, or bank rolls, dismissed as unremarkable because their errors don't leap out at first glance. The very reason they've remained hidden so long is their subtlety. A slight tilt in the lettering. A whisper of extra metal. A rotation just a breath off normal, yet, it's in that quiet irregularity that their value lies. Collectors now know that 1989 wasn't just another minting year. It was a year when an unusually high concentration of minor mishaps aligned. Each error, by itself, might not turn heads. But together, they painted a compelling picture, a pocket-sized relic, seemingly ordinary, born of mechanical imperfection and human oversight, surviving unnoticed for decades. One of the most compelling finds came just last year, when a young collector in North Carolina, just 17 years old, posted a picture of a dime with misaligned dies that had created a ghostly doubling across Roosevelt's jawline and a faint crescent of blank space along the edge, where the collar had failed to fully form the rim. The coin was almost dismissed by the online community until a numismatic expert reached out and offered a free grading. It came back MS-65 and sold within weeks for $79,000 at a regional coin auction, and now, with each passing year, the market continues to evolve. As more collectors recognize the quiet brilliance of these coins, prices have begun to surge. High-grade examples, especially those combining multiple error types, are no longer novelties, they're coveted treasures. Their market trajectory mirrors some of the most sought-after modern error coins, defying the assumption that older dates automatically hold more weight. In a coin collecting world often defined by the loudest rarities, the glaring double dies of the 1950s, the high-relief experiments of the early 1900s, the 1989 dime is a study in understatement. It whispers rather than shouts. But for those who listen closely, for those willing to inspect the smallest details, it rewards generously. What was once just another coin in the till has become one of the most compelling modern-day mysteries in American numismatics. Today, the verified 1989 US 1 dime coin errors, those marked by unique die flaws, off-center strikes, collar failures, or double impressions, carry a remarkable valuation. Depending on the nature of the error and the condition of the coin, its worth ranges between $38,000 and $86,000. A humble 10-cent piece, transformed not by age or metal, but by imperfection itself. The coins of 1995 flowed into circulation much like the wind passing over the plains, silent, unnoticed, and unremarked by most. The Roosevelt Dime, a familiar 10-cent piece adorned with the stoic profile of Franklin D. Roosevelt, continued its decades-long run since replacing the Mercury dime in 1946. The U.S. Mint in Philadelphia and Denver maintained their steady rhythm, minting over 1 billion dimes that year, each one seemingly identical in appearance and intent. They passed through pockets, purses, and cash drawers. At a glance, there was nothing special about the 1995 dime. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once. Until someone looked closer, not in a lab or a collector's showcase, but in a diner tucked off the I-10 near Tucson, Arizona, where a retired machinist named Leonard Pratt paid for his morning coffee with a handful of change. Leonard was the kind of man who noticed details others missed. Years of precision work on factory floors had trained his eyes and hands to catch imperfections most people would overlook. And that day, something about a dime he'd received in his change scratched at his instincts that he examined it briefly while sipping his coffee, his fingers brushing over the edge. It felt strange, lighter maybe, thinner. He couldn't be sure. But as he rolled it between his fingers, he noticed something odd about the coin's rim. The reeded edge wasn't sharp or distinct. It was blurred, uneven, as though the collar hadn't fully gripped it during the strike. He set it aside and finished his breakfast. Later that evening, at home beneath the yellow light of his old workbench lamp, he took a magnifying glass to the coin. The closer he looked, the more unusual it became. The obverse design was misaligned. Roosevelt's profile sat too high, crowding the top of the coin, while the date hugged the bottom rim, slightly compressed. But it was the date itself, 1995, that held his attention. The digits weren't crisp. Instead, they showed faint but undeniable doubling. The 9 was particularly pronounced, with a second shadow curve just barely overlapping. This wasn't post-mint damage. It looked like a true die error, something minted into the coin itself. He flipped it over. The reverse design, the torch, olive branch, and oak branch, appeared similarly soft, as if struck without full pressure. There was no mint mark, but that wasn't unusual for coins struck in Philadelphia. What was unusual was the weight. He placed it on his small digital scale. 2.15 grams. That was underweight for a Roosevelt dime, which should register at 2.27 grams. Curious, he measured several other dimes from the same pocketful. All were within standard range. Only the 1995 piece fell below. The implications were slowly settling into Leonard's mind. The coin may have been struck on a misaligned or thin planchet, possibly one not intended for a U.S. dime at all. He consulted an old numismatic reference guide he kept in his bookshelf and began cross-referencing known error types. Off-center strikes, double dies, off-metal strikes. This coin seemed to tick multiple boxes. Hesitant to make assumptions, Leonard reached out to a regional coin club. The members were curious, though skeptical. Many assumed it was damage or a counterfeit. But one member, a semi-retired numismatist named Irene Walsh, asked to see it in person. Upon examining it, Irene grew quiet. Her fingers moved slowly over the coin as she held it under her loupe. Finally, she looked up and said, "This isn't just an error. This is history." She encouraged Leonard to submit it to a grading service. He agreed, sending it off to Numismatic Guarantee Company with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Weeks later, the results came in: 1995 Roosevelt dime, double die obverse, off-metal planchet strike, MS-63. A true rarity. The announcement sparked conversation in online communities and collector circles. A coin struck in 1995, appearing normal at a glance but hiding a double die and a possible off-metal planchet. This wasn't just a minting hiccup. This was a convergence of minting anomalies, a confluence of errors unlikely to repeat. And it had slipped through unnoticed into the vast ocean of U.S. coinage. What made it even more mysterious was the lack of documentation of any known widespread errors from 1995. Mint records showed nothing unusual that year. No equipment malfunction, no planchet shortage or known die misalignments. This coin had seemingly emerged out of nowhere, like a ghost in the machine. As the months passed, Leonard's find drew increasing attention. Another collector in Florida claimed to possess a similar 1995 dime. It too featured doubling on the date and an off-center strike, though not as pronounced. A third example surfaced at a private appraisal event in Illinois, this one with a reverse brockage and visibly incomplete reading. All told, only 3 coins matching the characteristics were confirmed. The rarity pushed demand higher. Leonard began receiving offers. First, a cautious collector offered $13,500. Then another reached out with a proposal of $7,800. A dealer in New York hinted at a potential 5-figure auction if he chose to part with it. Still, Leonard waited. He was fascinated by the way the coin's story continued to unfold, how something so small could spark such widespread interest. By 2017, the confirmed count had reached 6. Each one slightly different, yet tied by the common thread of date doubling, misalignment, and incorrect planchet specifications. One coin, discovered in a Michigan estate sale, was confirmed to have been struck on a planchet intended for a foreign denomination, believed to be a Philippine 10-centimo blank, which matched the weight discrepancy exactly. This revelation opened the door to a new theory. During the mid-90s, the U.S. Mint struck coinage for several other countries. Planchets for these international contracts were stored in the same facilities as domestic coin blanks. In rare instances, a planchet intended for a foreign coin could be misfed into a press meant for a U.S. denomination. It was rare, but not impossible. And the 1995 dime, it appeared, had become the newest evidence of such an occurrence. In 2019, a 7th specimen was uncovered by a high school student in Oregon working on a coin-themed science fair project. The coin, lightly worn but clearly bearing the same double die obverse and misaligned strike, was authenticated and graded $58. Even in that condition, it was sold to a private buyer for $18,200. The news was met with disbelief and renewed enthusiasm. More eyes turned to pocket change. More collectors dug through old jars and drawers. Leonard, watching the growing fascination with the error series he'd unintentionally discovered, finally decided to bring his coin to auction. It was 2022, and the demand for unique mint errors had never been higher. The event was held discreetly, attended by a mixture of dealers, investors, and private collectors. Bidding began with little fanfare, but momentum built quickly. Within 20 minutes, the number had soared past $60,000. The final hammer dropped at $94,000. The sale of Leonard's coin set a new benchmark for the 1995 Roosevelt Dime error series. Soon after, lower-grade examples started appearing in auctions, fetching prices between $40,000 and $60,000, depending on condition and clarity of error features. Higher-grade examples, especially those with full strike doubling and off-metal analysis, were projected to exceed 6 figures if offered. In 2024, a newly discovered coin, flawless, untouched, graded MS-67, surfaced in a private East Coast collection. It bore not only the classic doubling and weight anomaly but also retained full luster and clear reading despite the planchet error. It sold in a closed auction for $115,000, setting a new record. Today, the 1995 rare Roosevelt dime remains a testament to what can happen when an ordinary coin breaks the rules of its creation. With only a handful of verified examples in existence, its value now stands between $40,000 and $115,000, depending on grade and characteristics. It's not just a coin, it's a quiet revolution, born from the smallest of mistakes and discovered by the simplest act of paying attention.